Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Councillor Harris. I'm with the City of St. John, Councillor at Large here. And tonight, as you have probably all already read in our little poster and our event across a few different networks, including Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, I am basically hosting a chat about climate action in New Brunswick. And that would include a number of different topics, but what we wanted to do was give different municipalities, give you as the viewer um, different opportunities to engage with what's happening across municipalities in New Brunswick. And tonight I have with me four other councillors from those different, three other councillors, four including me, from those different municipalities. And I'm just going to bring everybody up here now. And so we have Sabina Dietz from the town of Sackville. We have Noah Donovan from the town of Quispamsis, and Margot Shepherd from Fredericton, from the city of Fredericton. So we are, trying to bring a lens of, I guess, a differing lens and perspective across these different municipalities around a single topic, which is climate action, which many would remember it's been getting fairly strong headlines and fairly strong coverage from across the different medias in the last month. COP26 was in the month of November. So the world really did rally around Glasgow in Scotland and try to hammer out some better agreements, some better frameworks, and some more concrete actions to take as different entities. And this year, one of the features of that was this cities race to zero thing, which is basically signing cities on and getting the city's lens of municipal climate action into those former frameworks. And there were a number of Canadian cities that were able to sign on to that ahead of COP26. Ours here in St. John was one of them, and I know others around the province have begun those conversations as well, or if they haven't talked about it from a cities race to zero perspective, because not every obviously, even here, there's not all cities, there's towns, there's villages, they all have different lenses and different things to apply. And so that conversation continues to grow. And I know Halifax adopted it, we adopted it here in St. John. And so tonight, really, that's what it's about. It's about continuing that conversation, ensuring that the frameworks that we're developing as municipal councillors, the actions we're trying to champion, and the outcomes we're trying to deliver on are understood by people within the province. And so, yeah, we want to thank everybody for coming. Essentially, tonight, the format will be pretty simple. We'll have a small introduction. I've already given mine from the City of St. John as Councillor Harris here, but we'll have a little go around for a first round on, these are the things that our town or our council are currently doing to try to mitigate or adapt to climate change realities. These are the things, and then we'll go around a second time to talk about what we hope to do in the future. And in there, we'll have some conversations as well around what it is that we wish we could do. And that could be talking about, things that we're currently not able to do because there's a lack of legislation. That could be something that we're not able to do because of a lack of partnership opportunities. It could be a number of things. So that really is an open-ended opportunity for different, like I said, the different councillors to comment on. And then we'll get into your questions. So obviously we've been trying to spread the word on this event and this opportunity for people to engage. And so then we'll be kind of tracking along. I'll be tracking along on the different platforms here to see your comments. And so at the end, you'll have an opportunity for us to engage with your comments. And it could be asked specifically to a councillor, or it could be asked in a way that's asking everybody to weigh in on. And I guess there's one caveat I would ask for tonight. It's that everybody have some patience and grace, because this is the first time the four of us have met in some cases, or especially doing something like this. And actually, as far as I know, this is the first time everybody around this table is actually a councillor. So we're 6 months in on the job, really, and there's a lot to get caught up on, and there's a lot to try to understand. So, yeah, just patience and grace on that front. So we'll start with the question, what are our communities currently doing? And I have a little cheat sheet here of paperwork that we're doing here in St. John. And after myself, we'll go to Sabina in the town of Sackville and bring her lens, and we'll just go down to Councillor Donovan and Councillor Shepherd after that. And we'll kind of switch the order on the next round. And so the question is what currently is the City of St. John doing to mitigate climate action, or to mitigate climate change and to adapt to climate change realities? And there's a couple of things. As I mentioned off the top, is we were the first city of New Brunswick to adopt that Cities Race to Zero pledge. And what that is it's taking that Paris Climate Accord agreement where we're saying, hey, we recognize climate change is a problem, where we recognize that major action needs to be taken, we recognize that we need to keep global warming to a certain degree increase and no more, which is 1.5 degrees. And we work from there. And that goes all the way back to Kyoto. It's interesting to me to know that we have really high level researchers and people who are actually representing Canada as New Brunswickers in that original Kyoto Climate Accord exchange back in the day, which we do have with Louise Como, who's continues the fight for climate change as a researcher, as an advocate, and she's certainly been someone that I've connected with. So there is a bit of a heritage we have here in New Brunswick for environmentalism. I assume people will remember those rallies that were held against fracking. That generated a lot of public support and a lot of public engagement around what we think is acceptable on our properties and land, and what risks we're willing to take for the sake of that kind of extractive industry. So it's uncommon for New Brunswickers to talk about. And in St. John, it's interesting because we are, this seen as this center of industry, and it shocked a lot of people. And I think some people are still scratching their heads to see that St. John adopted this Cities Race to Zero because of the presence of so much heavy industry. But for us, one of the reasons we wanted to do that is the City of St. John already undertook pretty major commitments back in 2019 to address climate change. So the former council under former Mayor Don Darling undertook a comprehensive assessment, basically an inventory of what this would have been in 2018, 2019. What is the current carbon footprint of the city corporate? So that corporation would just be our city infrastructure, city departments, anything within the city corporation itself. And then also, what would be the community climate carbon footprint? And so we had that baseline assessment done so that we could try to understand the baseline and understand where we could try to target our mitigating efforts or our adapting efforts. And so in 2019, we adopted our corporate and community climate action plan. And those were basically aligning us with the Paris Climate Accord. That would have been May 6, 2019. We declared the climate emergency. And from there, the plans laid out, here are the specific areas of the city or city life that produce these emissions, and here's where you could target, and at least so that from a policy making perspective, we could start to develop shovel-ready ideas and projects that would begin to lower those carbon emissions. So we did that in 19, and then the Cities Race to Zero was basically another layer of that. It's going a step further and saying we're committing to be carbon neutral by 2050. Ideally 2040 is the goal there, but certainly by 2050. It means we're going a step further and actually communicating to an internationally recognized body to communicate what our our realities are on the ground as we go. So we're reporting to the CDA on what's happening in St. John, what we've done, what the outcomes are, and what we want to do next. And it lays out a bunch of other things. It talks about committing to putting inclusive climate action at the center of all urban decision making. So that really is looking at developing. When we're looking at different developments, we're looking at what does the climate lens tell us about this development. Is it going to give us the best opportunity to lower the aggregate level of carbon, or our carbon footprint overall? Those are the kind of that's the kind of lens that it leads to, is looking at development differently, at least with that lens, as well as how we're preparing our infrastructure for the new realities of sea level rise and things like flooding, which we've seen here in the city and around the city. So that kind of has found its way into our urban policy making and decision making as well. It's like an open invitation to other levels of society. So it could be business, it could be commerce, it could be industry, to say, look, this is what your city's doing, and we'd love to align our goals and our projects and our activities around yours as well. And here's how you could help, or here's how you could and match that commitment to what the city's doing for that alignment. So beyond that, there really is just a baseline level of activity that the city has been doing for the last couple of years. One of them, especially around sea level rise, we've had a major investment in our waterfront to reinforce and raise our harbor area infrastructure so that it can sustain itself as sea levels rise. We've adopted an ADAPT framework, which was done by Atlantic Coastal Area Protections, ACAP St. John. They helped kind of frame that entire, look. I guess it's a high level look at what will happen when sea levels rise to the kind of worst case scenario, and what communities will be underwater and how we can begin to address that infrastructure deficit now, to engage with that and to prevent that. And yeah, I think that's it at a high level. I don't want to spend all of our time talking about what St. John's doing. That's just a couple of things we're doing. We continue to have really interesting nonprofit groups around the city take different initiatives like tree planting. ACAP's done some work around that. Community centers have done some work around that. I spoke to a community organization a few weeks ago that have an interest in urban forestry and keeping urban forests and things like that. So there continue to be, just because the city has talked about it, it kind of continues to download itself into the community, and people in the community will find different pieces of that they care about and are excited about, and they'll run with. And so that's, to me, probably the more exciting thing than just the fact that the city's doing things. It's the fact that it is catching on at the grassroots. And yeah, so I want to be sensitive to our time, and we'll absolutely look at any questions you have if you have specific questions about St. John. But I want to move over to Sabina at the town of Sackville just to give an intro and a little bit about what they're doing in Sackville.
Thanks, Brent. So it's really interesting to listen to you, because of course our sizes are extremely different. I mean, I'm the smallest. I'm basically in the smallest town here around the table. Saco has 5,500 residents, very small. And one of the reasons that I ran in the last election, I really ran on a climate lens. So wanting to put the climate lens a bit closer to council and to operations and push at the council level. The reason for that is I strongly believed in the power of local governments to make changes on the ground in terms of mitigation and adaptation. Sackville has it's got a fantastic history around climate change, really great, but it's not based necessarily on what Sackville drove, but what our local EOS Equal Energy, our local community organization, drove. And that's been going on for well over 10 years. So, I'm just going to point to the town hall, which is LEED certified, which the EOS Equal Energy helped the town get a 1 million grant for that building in 2010, 2013. So, significant work back then. You mentioned that St. John has gone through, is basically assessing its carbon impact and planning to reduce it or reducing it, and with the steps and action plan. Sackville has gone through the entire process now once. We have just completed phase 5. Again, EOS Equal Energy is a total integral part of what Sackville as a community has done, a community organization. So long-term work on both ends, mitigation and adaptation. And, if you know where we are, we're at the close to the border to Nova Scotia. So the famous Chignecto Isthmus, the dikes here in Sackville protect our downtown. And if you don't know, the dikes were built to protect agricultural land, which can be flooded from time to time, but it now protects quite a significant amount of infrastructure, including, of course, the highway, CN Rail, and our downtown from Sackville. So, and staff and EOS Equal Energy have been involved in that for many years. So one of the things in 2010 to 2013, Sackville was part of an initiative to provide tools to municipalities to plan for climate change impacts from sea level rise in particular. And the town of Sackville itself was heavily involved in that. It was a learning exercise in terms of what is going to happen. A couple of things since then. Town of Saco has implemented a naturalized stormwater management pond in response to inland flooding, so downtown flooding. Our famous Lawn Street, which is really below sea level. And that has engaged the community in providing, ideas on what this stormwater management pond should look like. Not just a gray basin that fills up with water, but actually designing something that becomes a natural area. It is actually now next week being designated as a park area in Sackville. I should say, of course, we have Mount Allison University in our small community. We also have Canadian Wildlife Service. We've got a lot of retired biologists. So we've got a lot of resources at our hands as a town to get input or support for actions that probably are not necessarily common for small municipalities like ours. A couple other things. So EOS Equal Energy, I mentioned it already. It's a really important community organization in Sackville. Supports the town of Sackville. There is, for example, on the roof of the Sackville Town Hall now, there's a rooftop garden or green roof that EOS Equal Energy worked on together with the town of Sackville. That was completed this year. Sackville has also worked with the organization to do a depaving experiment, so taking out part of a parking lot and installing some permeable paving there. Sackville as a town is always ready to collaborate on these kind of joint projects with the organization. It's a really excellent relationship. So for small communities that do not have, the budget power or the resources, human resources, an essential piece of making action happen on the ground. I'll mention the Chignecto Isthmus again, because again, the town of Sackville is involved in the Chignecto climate change Chignecto Isthmus Climate Change Collaborative, which has also been in existence since 2013, trying to together with our Nova Scotia folks to work on learning as well as lobbying around the Chignecto Isthmus or anything having to do with climate change adaptation. It's focused on adaptation. A couple other things that happened, all of us remember the climate strike, getting over 400 people out for a climate strike in a town of 5,500 people is massive. That happened in Sackville. And as a result of that, the then council and the then mayor called a mayor's roundtable on climate change into being. That's been in existence since 2019. A couple of things that roundtable has done, and it includes fantastic resources, folks from the community. So it's open to anybody who wants to contribute to the climate change conversation, both adaptation and mitigation in Sackville. And it's a very broad conversation. So in 2019, it was formed. In spring of 2020, the Mayor's Roundtable organized a public forum, basically opening it up to input from all across the community. What actions can we do as a community to address both mitigation, so greenhouse gas emissions, as well as risk from flooding and other impacts from climate change. And that then really slowed down over COVID, of course, with everything going virtual. But The Mayor's Roundtable is still in existence. The first time it really did its work was on a budget in 2019. So they saw the projects that were presented. I was part of the Mayor's Roundtable back then, and we had an opportunity to put a climate lens on all of the proposed capital projects for the following year, for 2020. And as a result, some changes were made to those projects. So some were not pursued as a result of the critique that was given by the Mayor's Roundtable, and some were adjusted because the Mayor's Roundtable had provided some input on, well, you may want to look at this for this particular project, which was done. So really good. Following out of that, we actually just recently approved the Climate Change Advisory Committee, so a committee of council, before the municipal reform paper dropped. And EOS Equal Energy, again, that organization pops up in collaboration with the town, hired a climate change coordinator specifically to work with the town on climate change projects, work, research, support staff in their work to include climate change considerations in what we do as a town. So I should say we have currently, I think, 37 staff in our town.
Is that, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I have to interrupt there, because is that a full-time position dedicated to climate change planning and agreements?
Yes. Yeah. Short term.
Okay.
Hired by EOS Equal Energy. The town of Sackville contributes significantly to that position. EOS Equal Energy raised some funds for the position, but the intent is literally in the long term to have that as a town staff person. Now, you will appreciate that the reform is problematic with that, and also that staff are unionized, and so it's always difficult to add staffing to a unionized environment. So we're all aware of this, but the intent was definitely to have that, to try it out now, to try it on this 1 year basis. But the intent was there. Yes, we want this.
Well, the reason I interrupt there, because I know I've spoken to Commissioner McGovern, who's our Commissioner of Infrastructure, and Samir, who is one of those grant writing research types that we have at the city. And he works this file off the side of his desk. And they've said to me, the next thing is that the city of St. John needs a climate change coordinator. And I said, what, we don't have one? And said, no, Samir is buried in work, and this is one of the things he works. So this is something I've just learned, is that, the town of Sackville has this position, and that's amazing.
Just remember, not in town, not with town staff, but linked totally. The purpose is really to help the town, to support the town. Yeah. And the real reason for this is really, recognizing that with 37 staff and the demands on the staff, that you're absolutely right, this is usually on the side of the desk. And you can't ask that. You can't ask staff, for example, when I brought up fireworks as an issue I just popped it up. What are the environmental climate change implications of fireworks? As we pay for fireworks each year, I either do Canada Day, and I feel really bad about it. Now one of the staff people has to go off and do some research. I did research parallel to that and said, I recognize this is really hard to do. It's time consuming. And so when you think that this fireworks is a tiny little thing compared to all the research and understanding you need to gain for making decisions based on climate change. So to me, until everybody is sort of up to speed on, I see in the future staff becoming very knowledgeable and understanding the impacts and understanding using a climate lens when they look at work and projects. That's not the case yet. And so there's a time period where you need, I think, the human resources to support that change of understanding. And so that's where our climate change coordinator comes in. So we have one. Fantastic, community of 5,500 people, and I'm so proud of my community for that. Yeah. It's a huge step, and so the plan now was again the reform throws things a bit off because that puts more strain on our human resources and our staff, and I acknowledge that. But the plan was literally to work with the coordinator on figuring out how we as a small community can implement a climate lens on everything. Like whether you are, and nothing too complicated. So you can actually change your thought process from, okay, we need to buy a Zamboni, to we need to buy a Zamboni. What impact will that Zamboni have on greenhouse gas emissions? Oops, okay. Can we change how we think? Are there actually Zambonis that are electric? You may have seen in CBC News that there's actually electric Zambonis.
Yes.
And so this conversation, this thinking, is where we need to go. What are the impacts of what we're planning to do, both on adaptation mitigation, greenhouse gas emissions, as well as increasing runoff, which is a big water. What are those impacts? Being able to look at what the impacts are, understanding them, and then seeing, well, how can we mitigate, whether it is increasing infiltration of water, or whether it is reducing the greenhouse gas emissions by maybe offsetting, plant more trees, right?
Yeah.
So that's our work. That's where we're at. A really engaged community, a really engaged nonprofit organization, EOS Equal Energy, really engaged councillors, and really engaged staff. So it's almost like that's why I said before the municipal reform happened, I've been really enjoying my work, and since the white paper dropped, I've been thinking I shouldn't have run. But it's fantastic what this community has been able to achieve, and I'm hoping that we can get past that mess right now and not drop the ball on the many things that we've got going for us. So
yeah. No, that's really wonderful. I appreciate that's a really good, succinct. I am a Mount Allison grad, so I have a special place in my heart for Sackville. And I was just in Sackville a couple weekends ago. I was up in Moncton for a few visits with some different folks. So that lens and the horsepower that the city brings, that the university brings to the town is always nice, and but it is amazing to see. I've heard even on national radio about this the Chignagno Isthmus and what those realities are, and what the town is proposing and trying to figure out. It's a big problem, and it's province wide, even though it's focused on that. And so it's always interesting to see how little towns, big towns, kind of meet in this space of what are we doing, what do we need to do. So I appreciate that. And just so for everybody's watching here, I see there's about 20 people who are viewing in from different places. Just to get everybody caught up, we're doing a bit of an interview style, go around the circle about what it is our communities are doing to mitigate, adapt to climate change, take action, and from a municipal councillor's perspective, which is one that we often don't hear about, but coming out of COP26 in November is a nice thing to kind of get on the docket, if you will, to get into the digital sphere, so that people have a chance to listen and learn about that. We're going to go to Councillor Noah Donovan next at the town of Quispamsis, who, just as a little kind of feather in the hat point, is the youngest councillor in this province, which is so inspiring and amazing to have him here tonight. I did forget one thing about the city of St. John that I have to mention before we go to Noah, and that is that we have St. John Energy, who is paving a way on municipal energy utility leadership. It's been recognized internationally. They have partnered with the Indigenous community to establish Birch Hill Wind Farm, which is going to deliver up to 15% of the needs of the community of St. John in a renewable sense. We'll talk more about that later, but I had to give a plug for St. John Energy because I can't believe I forgot to give that plug in my initial plug. Anyway, we'll go to Councillor Donovan next.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me and giving me the chance to speak a little bit. Something I think you're going to notice a little bit throughout my conversation, at least, is that Quispamsis is a community of firsts. It's, as a strong leader on many fronts. And, I'll start off by saying that Quispamsis was actually the first municipality in New Brunswick to join the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I always get so confused with all the terms, but they were the first municipality in New Brunswick to join the Federal Association of Canadian Municipalities Climate Protection Caucus, I guess you could say, and that was back in 1998. So that was a year before I was born. But that was based on the actual original Kyoto Protocol. I think it was called the Kyoto Protocol. And the town of Quispamsis also, before it was fashionable, actually had a climate change committee in 2005. So if you look back, I feel like in 2005, that was a big step for, any municipality, especially, a smaller one, because it was a fairly smaller municipality back then. But And like I said, no disrespect. I think that anytime a municipality develops a plan or, has a climate change committee, doesn't matter when it is, it's really important. But I think it just kind of speaks, to the willingness of our town to actually, jump right in there and get involved with things surrounding climate change, especially in 2005. So I'm just going to kind of touch on some of the main points because there's so many, just like Brent said, that, the town of Quispamsis, and I'm sure all of our towns have done, but one of the main things that we have under our sleeve is the Quispamsis Qplex. And with the Qplex, it is actually a LEED certified building. So basically what that means is it's a smart energy certified building. There's things in the that were done during the construction of the Qplex to make it, stand up to this nationally recognized certification. So some of the things that are done in the Qplex are actually, in the bathrooms. So we have storm water drains that we collect rainwater from the roof, and it gets filtered into like a system underneath the Qplex or in one of the back rooms. And we actually use that, it goes into our gray water tank and we use it to flush the toilets. And we also have dry urinals, so it's not using any water for the urinal systems. And we also use that gray water, it's obviously cleaned, it goes through a filtration process, and we use the gray water that we collect from the roof to top up the pool and to flood the ice in order to get new ice in the rink. The roof of the Qplex is actually painted a certain color so it reflects the sun. So when the sun shines down, it doesn't just shine straight in to the building and use up a lot of energy. It actually reflects so that we don't have to spend as much money or as much electricity to heat or cool the building. And there's a lot of LED light fixtures in the building. And to go back to Sabine's point earlier about the electric Zamboni, we actually have an electric Zamboni in the Qplex, and it, from my understanding, it works fantastic. It's been going for a while, and it's still moving. So I guess that's the main thing about it. But yeah, so the Qplex is a fairly big thing in our town, and that's honestly, it's my prized possession. I really like the Qplex because I think it's sort of the hub. We do so many other things besides the Qplex, but it's the hub of where everything started, I believe, just in my opinion. Some of the other things that we do is we actually in the town have an engineered wetland system. So for sewage and wastewater, it goes into like a big wetland area that's man-made, obviously, and there are like oxygen tanks and things like that are in the holding areas that aerate the water. And when it aerates the water, it provides like a habitat or an ecosystem for the micronutrients or like I don't know what it's called, but like the bugs and stuff to actually thrive. And it allows, flowers and like shrubs and stuff like that to actually, filter out the wastewater so that we don't actually have to dump a pile of chemicals in it or use a ton of electricity to actually get it cleaned. And just recently, actually, we were talking about the town of Quispamsis is trying to switch over to some solar power for our wastewater plants. So that way, obviously, we're not using a lot of electricity to do that. So something I've noticed fairly recently is there's a lot of homes in Quispamsis that are actually converting to net zero and trying to figure out ways that they can be more energy efficient. And I find it kind of interesting because the town of Quispamsis actually has a building inspector who is federally certified as an energy advisor, and he's created tools for our residents to assist local contractors, and it helps them comply with energy codes so that they're whether they're building a garage, a shed, or a house, he provides ways that they could make it more energy efficient. So in the long run, they're not using more energy or creating more emissions in that sense. I think finally for now, I'm sure I'm missing something, and I'll probably get yelled at some point because I had a very strong list here of things I needed to go through. But the final thing that I think for me is the lights that we have at the Arts and Culture Park. So Quispamsis has what's called a holiday dreamland, and it's very, very, very big. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there are, close to 1 million lights in the park, like 1 million light bulbs. And they are actually all LED. So all the lights that we have up don't draw as much electricity, and they get turned off at a certain time. So it's great that people can go during the day, or during the evening and enjoy it. But it turns off at a certain time. So it's not like an ongoing, a thing that draws energy. But I think that's it for me for right now. Like I said, it's Quispamsis, and I'm sure there's, like everybody that's on this panel tonight, their municipalities are doing wonderful things. But I just kind of wanted to give a little bit of an insight of what Quispamsis was doing, and hopefully I can get some ideas to bring back to our climate change committee tonight. Thanks.
Well, I'm already getting some ideas from both you and Sabina and Sackville. So it's lovely to have these conversations, to get that kind of creative energy flowing about, because there's things missing. It's funny you mentioned this this building inspector who has this lens that they apply, Noah, because today I was listening to Matt Galloway on CBC talk about, and I'm blanking on the author's name, but he's kind of a renowned architect. He's just written a book called Living the 1.5 degree lifestyle. And I just thought it was amazing to hear this gentleman speak about how to live our lifestyles, how to adapt our buildings and all this. As a builder, of course, I'm up to date on how we can take those actions, but he goes into a full range of lifestyle and things. And I think more and more, we're going to have these people in our communities. And so it's pretty amazing to hear that Quispamsis already has kind of a resident expert.
And I think one of my favorite, sorry to cut you off, I think one of my favorite things about having our building inspector actually be smart, home energy certified is the fact that, these residents or these, contractors or developers that are looking to develop in our community, it's not like an added expense that they actually have to go out of their way, and most people think, when they think of added expense, they think, it's going to cost money. But for a lot of people, it's the inconvenience of things. If they have to go far out of the way in order to actually, try to figure out the best way to make their homes energy efficient, then most people, unfortunately, in my opinion, I don't think they actually will. And I feel like that's kind of where some communities set themselves up for failure, is not having that option at that first point of contact.
Yeah, and to your point, just a little plug for the city of Halifax, because they've taken this a step further, and they've said they have a goal to mitigate 50,000 homes by 2050 to meet their climate action targets. And one of the ways they're trying to do that is bringing in-house energy efficiency retrofits, bring in-house energy efficient upgrade experts and community tie-in and connection. So I think Halifax has taken a bit of a pretty hard shot at this, to say, look, there's easily 50,000 buildings, like homes in our community, that are kind of high level, big emitters, because they're either so old or poorly built or so big, whatever, that we can make a dent in this. And so, you can see how that scales up, like that position you have scales up from there. And that's amazing. So anyway, we'll go to Councillor Margot Shepherd in Fredericton next to kind of give us a little bit about what's happening in Freddie.
Sure. Thanks very much, Brent, for organizing this, and it's great to see other people. I've known Sabina a long time, and she wears many hats, and she's underplaying her role in getting Sackville, really sensitive to climate concerns and acting. So hats off to you, Sabina. So Fredericton is one of the, our population is around 60,000 now. We are now part of a census metropolitan area, which means that your surroundings within, I think, 50 kilometers has 100,000 people. So it's kind of a regional center, bit of a white collar government, high tech, university town, just light industry, no heavy industry that I know of. And so back in the early 2000s, for many years, Fredericton had a program that was called the Green Shops and Green Matters campaign. So it was very much focused on getting members of the community involved in recycling and cutting down on waste products, composting, and that kind of thing. And that program was quite successful, but for reasons that are unknown to me, it may have something to do with the conditional grant that was chopped quite severely. The program has kind of gone into dormancy, and during that time, from about 2016 onwards, the city was busy doing its climate energy and emissions plans for both its own corporate operations as well as for the community, and those, as well as a climate adaptation plan. And those three reports, I think the last one was just finished in March of 2021, and it was approved by City Council. It set targets for emissions reductions. There have been quite a few sort of changes in the staff, and right now the City of Fredericton has basically one full-time equivalent that's split between two personnel looking at climate matters and trying to implement changes at the corporate level, and have done a lot in terms of building upgrades, energy efficiency, a little bit of fuel switching, some solar panels on fire halls, and so on and so forth, retrofitting for water conservation and that kind of thing. The big area that is being worked on right now is how to engage the community members in climate, energy, and energy programs that reduce emissions. And so that's going to be a focus for the new year. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what our environment and climate specialist comes up with in terms of engaging the public, because as we all know, your corporate emissions are only a very small percentage of what your overall community emissions are. They're coming from different places, different sources of emissions, so that you have to take different approaches. But I guess that's the other thing in terms of adaptation is the engineering department has been doing a lot of road raising. They've gotten money from the Disaster Assistance and Mitigation Fund, and they've been doing road raising so that when the St. John River floods, it's not going to close off access for emergency vehicles and so on. And things like backflow valves on storm water. They've been doing separating the storm and the sanitary sewers over the years. So some headway has been made. A lot to do. A lot faster, in my humble opinion. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. We were asked as a municipality back in 2019 to declare a climate emergency by one of our local advocacy groups, the Council of Canadians, and that didn't fly at the time. I think it is, probably time to reconsider that decision and for what it can do to contextualize all of the changes that are going to be required of everybody, in the coming years. And it's really it's not a minor shift that has to take place. It's a major one. And looking globally, really what we need to be thinking about is how do we get our emissions down? How do we switch to renewable energy that's going to be there for the long term? And how do we protect people from, really overwhelming weather events and so on? So.
Yeah, that's excellent, and I think you sell yourself a little bit short here in the actions that Fredericton has taken. One of the things I've been watching from afar and doing the clap to is the dedicated work around active transportation routing. And I know it's because you have a built-in demographic that's going to use that with so many thousands of students at University of New Brunswick and STU and Renaissance College and you name it. But it is light years ahead of any other municipality in this province as far as the tie-in and the arterial tie-ins and the safety and the protected laning. And it really is the future. And leading into our next part, I'll talk a little bit about St. John's hopes for the future. But yeah, you guys have done a lot of work on that front as well. And I mean, this ties into Councillor Donovan's point as well as yours in Fredericton, Margot, is this idea of the St. John River flood and how we adapt to that reality. Hundreds of homes in Quispamsis, hundreds in Rosse, hundreds in St. John, thousands overall between Fredericton and here were affected in a pretty major way by that once in a century flood that we now are expecting once every 20 years, 30 years. It's speeding up and it's becoming more of a problem. So that's something I know that Fredericton, I mean, you guys you had Civic Tech Fredericton developed the Riverwatch app, which became this leading point of contact and reference for the flood watch that was happening. And it was a great example of civic engagement from the grassroots.
It's awesome. And the planning department has actually, I believe there's a rule in place now that you can't have any living space below 9 meters above sea level so that flooding doesn't affect you. One thing I will say that's kind of an interesting and exciting development in Fredericton is that the Canadian Home Builders Association, the New Brunswick chapter of that organization, is building a center of excellence in Fredericton. They have their permission to build this thing, and it's I'm very hopeful that it will have all manner of examples of different insulation and low carbon insulation and building materials that are low carbon, so that the embedded carbon within your construction isn't huge, because you're kind of defeating the purpose if you build a super tight or net zero house and build it with all high carbon insulations and building materials. So that's going to be going on, and very, very excited about that.
Yep, it's an area that I know well as a builder. It always surprises people to learn how. There's one example, and I heard it again repeated on this segment with Matt Galloway, is some of our spray foams that we use for insulating around windows are so bad. The climate, the embedded carbon of that single can of spray foam is so high, and the chemicals that are used are so bad, actually outlive the potential of its efficiency upgrade by decades. So, there used to be this blue spray foam on the market, and it was said if you did 2 windows in your whole house with 2 cans of blue spray foam, the carbon it took to produce that can of spray foam was so intensive that your house could never make up for the intensity of it, no matter how many layers of insulation you added. So it's stuff that we have to care about. Of excellence will be important for the rest of the province, because there's a lot of old school builders in this province that just don't have the opportunity to learn those things.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, we have innovators. I know there's a timber frame construction specialist up in Miramichi that actually has developed a structural insulated panel system that uses vegetable-based rigid foam for its base, and they've gone through some interesting trials and trying to get. So there's innovators here who are thinking about this. We don't often tell that story, right? And so maybe next time we'll reach out to Mayor Lorden and get him on. Maybe get him on here from Miramichi. Okay. So the next segment, and again, thank you for everybody sticking around. We're just going to do a bit of a rapid fire round here. We're going to go in reverse. So we're going to come back to you, Margot. And we're just to say, and it doesn't have to be super in depth, because we're still all getting our feet and we're still all trying to figure out, what are the barriers, what things are in the way, what do we need in place to take this to the next level? Because there is basically no one in this this discussion right now around climate action, and I'm sure Sabine, with the different hats that you wear, would confirm this, that can say that we're going hard enough, fast enough, with enough resolve, right? We're not. And so with that idea in place, what would be happening, or what are some of the conversations in Fredericton, Margot, where it's like, we would love to go after this, we would love to be able to accomplish this, but currently we don't either have the governance levers that we can pull to do it, or we don't have the infrastructure, or we don't have the partnerships with the province or the federal government to pull off?
Yeah. Well, I attended a Sustainable Communities Conference put on by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities a couple of weeks back. And almost every session in that was about home energy, and what municipalities, as sort of the trusted partner for a homeowner, more trusted than other levels of government, apparently, can do to incentivize and assist homeowners to get their emissions from their home heating way down. And so one of the things that I've been kind of pushing here, in addition to upping our climate ambition and our targets, which are, I don't think, just in light of the recent developments in the COP in Scotland, are adequate. So one of the, so I was going to talk about the PACE program, which is the Property Assessed Clean Energy program, which is, a way of tacking on the upfront costs of home improvements and alternative energy and things like that onto the property and not onto the homeowner. And so that's a way of, basically amortizing the cost of these things, which can be high. They're coming down all the time, solar panels in particular, but amortizing them over time. The liability runs with the property, so that the homeowner who puts them on and moves out 2 years later isn't disadvantaged, and the new owner gets to enjoy the amenity of more comfortable house that's more energy efficient and cheaper to run. So getting the PACE program, Conservation Council of New Brunswick has done a really good report to overcome the barriers associated with having basically municipalities not having the jurisdiction to offer incentives or loans or whatever have you to homeowners for energy. And we don't have a St. John Energy, sadly, in Fredericton. I wish we did. Actually, I found out this week that St. John Energy will rent a heat pump for something like $2 a day anywhere in New Brunswick. So that's great. I just wish that New Brunswick Power would get into, renting solar panels or whatever. So that's what my conversation is about. Getting this PACE program. I think if we could get some of the mayors together to talk about it at one of the forums that they have, the 8 cities or the Union of New Brunswick Municipalities, and we could make a deputation to the province to make these minor changes that empower municipalities to do much more in the energy realm. I think that would be a really good move.
Yeah, I think so too. I've seen some of the mentions of that. And like I said, Halifax has started to take some of this on in a major way with this pledge for 50,000 homes and trying to outsource different financing programs so that homeowners can access it if banks turn them down, and integrate with different, federal and provincial programs. So It really is the future. And I think PACE is a piece of that puzzle. There's no question. Next, we're going to go to Noah at the town of Quispamsis. What are those things that the town has talked about, or you've heard talked about, that you'd love to kind of go forward with and tackle had the right pieces been in place?
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to last night, for example. We had a a council meeting in the town, and we had a quick little discussion, and it was about, and I'm completely changing the subject a little bit, but it's still on topic. It was about the local governance reform paper that was just released, the white paper. And in it, it didn't, at least I didn't see, and a couple of the other councillors probably didn't see it either, judging by the discussion, was about, the environment, like what the province is going to start doing as far as the environment with the reforms. And something that was brought up, a really good idea, I actually really liked. It wasn't my idea, but it was a good one nonetheless. Was that, in our letter that we're writing to, Minister Alain, we'd like to, the town of Quispamsis, would like to see something as far as, with these new entities and these new municipalities that are being created, the province actually requiring them right from the get-go, to have, things like, a climate change committee, and, have very strategic and very set, specific and strict rules as far as what they can do, what they shouldn't do, and so on. And almost mandated, because obviously the ball has to start somewhere. And I think a lot of municipalities in and around, the St. John region and around New Brunswick are doing really good as far as climate change. But I think the opportunity is to, be able to just get those new councils started, give them a head start, and get them right on the ball as soon as possible, so that in 5-10 years it's not a big discussion about, oh, what should we do, what could we do, at least if it was done in the beginning, they wouldn't have to struggle or try to spend resources on creating different things and doing different plans. It would be all done and ready to go. But that's my opinion. That doesn't represent all of my council, obviously, but I thought it was a really good idea that was brought up last evening. And I think, again, one of the main issues as far as climate change, in my opinion, is actually reaching people, because Quispamsis is it's got a weird demographic. It's a lot of older folks, but there's it's mostly 30 to 40s, I believe, right now, and the up and coming younger generation. And I guess, like, in our town, for example, a lot of people do care about climate change. It's a very, important subject. And I heard from other councillors that it was brought up very often during, the election. But I think we're still missing people. I think some people may not understand, how much of a big deal it is, or, how quickly it's, it's creeping up on us. Because, again, I feel like, and it's not just in this community or in any of our communities, I feel like it's a worldwide issue. People just don't understand the urgency of it. And, if they don't understand the urgency of it, it gets, like everything else in government, it gets shifted to the very farthest burner it possibly can, because A, it costs money, and B, it's just too much time, and nobody has time to deal with that. But again, if it's something as urgent as climate change, and what we can do, I feel like we all as municipalities should be able to work together to inform the people that maybe aren't taking it as seriously, or and again, I don't even think it's just people aren't taking it seriously. I just don't think people understand. I am not going to come in here and claim that I know everything about climate change. I'm not on the climate change committee. I don't know everything about, I don't have every idea of what we should do or what we shouldn't do, but I would like to learn. And I feel like there's a lot of people out there that are actually like me, that just want to learn. They don't know, they're not for or against it. They just kind of want to know exactly what's going on, and what they could do to help move that discussion along. But that's my piece.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, right? One of the things that we've talked about in the past little while here in St. John is this need for a climate hub, which has been demonstrated to be successful in places like Cumberland County, Nova Scotia, and Halifax, at provide almost like that civic tech entity that I mentioned in Fredericton, that had a fairly high level outcome of part of its mandate, that they were going to get together and try to get civilians and people who are just volunteers and citizens engaged in technological solutions for community problems. And the Riverwatch app came out of that. Now, we have one in St. John here too. It's quite new. But I think the more we, to your point, Noah, download this to the citizenry and provide an avenue for the citizens to come back to the municipality with plans and potential opportunities, we're fostering good democracy, we're fostering better plans, and we immediately have buy-in. Oftentimes, council will come up with a thing, or a standing committee will come up with a thing, and the next step will be, okay, well, we need to get engagement from the public. But this is reversing that. It's like, what if there's avenues that exist, like climate action committees and things like that, or climate hubs for whole regions that are already giving that grassroots public engagement that council can then say, okay, well, we're going to pick that up and resource it.
And I think, honestly, I think a lot of the times, a lot of these municipalities, they do different things, to fight climate change, or, they have, every good, I guess you could say, good thought going forward. They're trying, all of them are trying to do good things, but sometimes the public just doesn't see that, for example, and I'm not picking on the city of St. John, but the city of St. John just signed that, that agreement, they become one of the first, or maybe the first city in New Brunswick to sign that. But I feel like that's something maybe that might get forgotten down the road. So, it's a big deal right now, like, oh, it's fantastic. But I feel like we need to keep up those conversations instead of just, little increments of, oh, we're doing great, and then it's back to normal. And then, oh, we're doing great, and it's back to normal, because people have, and again, my own opinion, I feel like a lot of people have, a short-term memory. So they see it and it's fantastic. They're like, my community is doing wonderful. And then it doesn't get brought up again. And then everything's perfect. There's no urgency in it whatsoever. But I don't know if that makes any sense or.
No, it does. I to your point, exactly right. Like, we don't have a climate committee. And so one of the outcomes I'm hoping with this conversation is that we can spark some people to join this climate hub between Quispam and the committee you have, and Rossay and Grand Bay and St. John. We already have Envision SJ. We've demonstrated that we can come together and set aside differences for regional growth and economic development, which took 2 years to do. And so, what's the potential for something like a climate hub?
And even as far as Envision St. John goes, even if they had like a subcommittee from Envision St. John, that, because there's already people from Quispamsis, Rossay, St. John, Grand Bay, and wherever, they're all there already. So even if they had a subcommittee, that made, recommendations going forward to the different towns, like, this is what we've decided might be good for our region, instead of, because I find what happens is each of the municipalities, they kind of look out for themselves. And I mean, that's good and bad, but obviously we're a region. So, if we had Envision St. John, or, in Fredericton or Sackville, if they had their own community organization like that could provide a little bit of oversight, I feel like we would be all on the same page, instead of, Quispamsis getting, 2 steps ahead of St. John, and then, Rossay following a step behind. And because if that's no good to anybody, if, Quispamsis is doing a whole lot of work and Rossay is doing none, or I'm not saying they're not, but if they're not doing as much as Quispamsis, then all the ground that we made to put in all this stuff, it kind of falls behind. Yeah. So I mean, that's just.
And to your point, I think maybe Sabina will mention some of that in her part, versus with this, forced amalgamation with surrounding communities that is really throwing so many things up in the air. I come from Blacks Harbor originally, and that that village won't exist anymore officially. It won't have a mayor of Blacks Harbor. It will have a mayor of, to what you said, Noah, on Twitter, George Harbor, which I'm like, that is a great name for a future rural community 10, I think it is, on the list. George Harbor.
I'm waiting for the government just to keep the numbers. Like, there's no St. George or Penfield. It's just going to be entity number 10. I can't wait. It's like the Hunger Games. Yeah,
I know. And somebody else said it should be called St. Harbor Field or something. I don't know. It's ridiculous. Anyway, Sabina, over to you. What are some things that, from your perspective as a councillor, but you also wear more than that hat, as Councillor Shepherd pointed out, you wear multiple hats here. You're certainly a leader and an advocate for climate action in New Brunswick. writ large. So, what are some things that are in the way or aren't aligned, and where we miss opportunities as municipalities?
So one thing, because all three of you spoke of communication to the populace, right, to the citizens, and engagement of the citizens, and I think, in many ways, small communities have an advantage, lots of disadvantages, but they have an advantage, and Sackville does have one, in that we have our climate hub. EOS Equal Energy has touched on everything from energy efficiency work with low income homes, all the way to solar panels, all the way to flood risk education, emergency education. So we have our hub, and it is it is regional. It is for the Tentamar area, includes Memram, Cook, Port Elgin, Dorchester. So it's already regional. So we've got this huge advantage as a town that, that it's more, the push is more coming from the grassroots than from the town itself. The town has pulled along and supported and is now on board, but that push has definitely come from the outside to make things move faster. So that's just sort of a hint on, I strongly believe in that engagement. I also strongly believe in grassroots power. The school students that come to town council and talk about, you better get on board and you better do something, being also partly engaged in community organizations, and all of that sort of pushes council to a different level. So that's a sideline. So some things, and I'll get back to the reform, because I want to first speak about the possibilities and then maybe about the barriers for our Entity 40 idea. So not Entity 10, Entity 40. There was also some very weird names that came up on Facebook. So a couple of things. Margot talked about the PACE program, or the PACE idea. And absolutely, this would be so fantastic in Sackville. Another one, many of us in Sackville have been looking with envy at St. John Energy. And the reason for that is that, we want this. We want to be able to be resilient. We want to be able to generate our own electricity for our own use and then, hand it off. There have been huge barriers to that. So as a result of this, we're really interested as a community in it. EOS Equal Energy has really nurtured that interest in renewable energy, has had several solar panel purchase programs in place, installation programs in place. And we have Beausejour Renewable Energy, which was created with the help of EOS and community members. It's a cooperative whose intent is to use the provincial Community Economic Development Corporation program to help homeowners or entities in Sackville to put solar panels or renewable energy on their roofs, etc. And I remember, I'm also part of BRE, Beausejour Renewable Energy, and we approached the town of Sackville for, hey, let's put some solar panels on Civic Center or on town roof, whatever. The problem always becomes there's too many regulatory barriers to that. And so the idea of communities being able to generate their own power and not to have to go through these complicated NB Power RFP programs, but really just straightforward. Yes, we can generate our own power, we can deliver it to our own community members, and we're not paying on top of that. I mean, the net metering program that the province currently has is totally absurd. This is what I envision for our community. We have both in terms of the town being really interested in resiliency, and we need to be, and resiliency broad, in terms of coming out of COVID, learning through COVID, what the community can do, having a community task force throughout COVID, and EOS Equal Energy during that year compiled a community resiliency guide, actions that people can do, and they go across the entire spectrum, include climate change actions. Well, everything is linked to climate change, so it really doesn't matter. So the way I envision this is that there's just more opportunities for towns, municipalities to do the things that they really want to do. Currently, there's too many barriers, whether it's pace, whether it's not being able to generate our own electricity, whether it is problems with zoning. We can't zone the way we want to. So the planning issue, and of course, going down the road to reform I have great concerns with planning regional plans overtopping municipal plans. They may water down our municipal planning process. I have great concerns with losing some of the progressive advances that we've made in Saco through the reform process, because we are one of the communities that's being forcefully amalgamated. And so it will create a barrier for us to advance. I think our community is strong enough to get through this and to continue. And EOS Equal Energy is certainly not going away. And the collaboration between our Climate Hub, our organization, our community organization that is extremely strong and extremely founded in the community, and the town itself is very strong. Those were two things that I really wanted to mention. Pace, absolutely important. Community generation and removing some of the barriers if we want to be more progressive in terms of planning and zoning. Those need to be in place so that, New Brunswick has this stupid idea of planning is about development. Well, it shouldn't be. It should be about safety and resiliency and risk reduction. And currently it isn't. And I was asked, one of you mentioned, in the paper, you didn't see anything about environment in there. Well, climate change was mentioned once. Yeah, okay. So to me, this is irresponsible, and it's also not what it should be. Municipalities, and I know that's a fact, we are about risk management. And so in terms of, and I'm slipping now to the adaptation side, right? So the whole idea of risk management, adaptation planning, making sure that the actions that we undertake don't put more people at risk. And that is not what's currently happening. We're not even able to do that as municipalities. We're not able to do that properly because the framework, the province doesn't have a framework around it. Anyway, so those are a couple things: better zoning, better planning, better energy, better permission or removal of barriers to us generating electricity, energy, pace, and just allowing us to work towards the resiliency of our communities in a more independent way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent points. I know the folks at St. John Energy will love to hear that shout out, because it has been an insane undertaking for this little municipal energy utility up against NB Power. And I hate to say up against, but it really has been against this. I'll get into it a little bit here in a second, but I wanted to circle back to this this piece that you're talking about, Sabina. Do you find that the ability of the town writ large to undertake some of these initiatives, or to advocate for even municipal reforms that you've mentioned, is that bolstered by the presence of Mount Allison and the university? Is there a good tie-in there between some of that, or does that fall on deaf ears when it gets to the province?
So I'll have to step back before the municipal reform paper dropped, okay? Because things have really changed. So I would say both having EOS Equal Energy, who's got a really good reputation across the province, and with the Department of Environment, local government in Fredericton, Mount Allison University, who we work really well together as a town. There's a really good relationship. In the past, Brent, you may remember that Mount Allison, there was this kind of town versus gown thing. I don't see that. There's a really strong relationship because we really work on the same things and want the same things. So there's a really good exchange there. So I think it does. Did you ask me whether it bolsters the sort of the impact we can have? I think it does, or it used to, or I thought it did.
I know when I was there. So for example, there was some of these interesting opportunities for the better performing students, which I was not. I was not one of these high 3.8 GPA performing students at Mount A, but some of my friends were, and they had opportunities to submit papers around things like environmental action, for different peer-reviewed journals for undergraduate students that got attention at media interviews. And that's really what it's about. It's not just about, does the province care about what these faculties or students think at universities, but does it spark public engagement that ends up, changing some of the minds of people who are at the provincial level? But I don't know if that's still the case there. It sounds like it's a bit of a hit and miss.
It's not. I think it's a. So I suspect I understand what you mean. So currently, or last pre-reform, we're supposed to undertake a review of our municipal plan in 2022. And one of the first things that the planner that lives in Sackville did was went to Mount A to a class and invited them to do some research on some specific topics that were of interest to us as town council. This kind of stuff happens all the time. I wish it was happening more, but there is a strong relationship on supporting work that Mount A students do and look at work that we need as a town, and help them achieve their goals in terms of community linkages. So I think, and I should just also mention the current MASU Vice President of External Affairs, who is also very engaged on our hospital issue. She, if I'm not mistaken, she submitted a paper to the town on our problems with recycling. Apartment buildings, our apartment buildings don't recycle, so there's no streaming of waste. I seem to recall that was pre this council, so the presentation was given beforehand. But so these kind of things are happening all the time, and they often influence very strongly decisions that council takes at the council level. So we go back to these presentations, say, hey, do you remember we should look at this again and maybe send this a study that this person did in their honors or something on to powers that be that make the decisions, whether it's in terms of garbage, whatever. So I think I would say it's not really. It's more integrated now than even when I arrived in Sackville, where profs used to tell me, well, we're having a really hard time, getting the connection going between community needs and Mount Allison University, and finding things that match both, where both can benefit. I think it happens now way more automatically.
Nice, yeah,
more naturally.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I know here in St. John we struggle with the province and the University of New Brunswick a bit. I'm a bit of course, I have preference for Mount A as a grad there, but it was always amazing to me to see, this private university create such a framework and such a stronghold for academia in Sackville, because St. John has like half the amount of student population that Sackville does in some cases. So it's we have a much smaller, I'm not saying it's half, but we have a much smaller footprint for students compared to the other cities like Fredericton and Moncton. And we're seeing that change a little bit. We've announced a new Institute of Healthcare that will be coming to St. John out of the University of New Brunswick through St. John and stuff. But it's always, I think, a helpful relationship to have with any municipality and a university. I've just seen it yield so many benefits over my lifetime. So anyway, a question worth talking about. Last part will come to me as far as talking about St. John and what we wished would be in place here and what's missing from the equation. It really, I think there's a lot of things. I could get into more. I would love it if the province had a clearer profile on what its goals are for climate action. And so I'll give you an example. City of St. John put out a list of council's priorities. So that is this embodied list of 5 priorities with attached goals over the next 5 years. I say 5 years, usually it's 4, but because of the white paper resetting some municipalities next year, my term as a councillor has been extended 1 year, so that when we go to the next election, all the municipalities go to the next election at the same time. That may surprise some, but that's the reality. But we don't know what the province wants to do. We don't know what they want to achieve around climate action, around climate mitigation, or around things like that. Whereas the federal government have kind of clearer headlines. They have clearer goals and they have clearer departments. As a homeowner, I know that NB Power has its efficiency upgrade system program where I can qualify. As a matter of fact, I was just in my attic this weekend insulating with blow-in insulation my entire attic, because this house was built in the 40s and it only had one layer of R12 insulation in the entire attic system. So that is 22 below a minimum requirement that we would build to now, and 32 below, or sorry, about 30 below what really we should be aiming for the future, and about 50 below what, anyway, we could keep going. So I have qualified for that. I also know that I tie into the federal Greener Homes Initiative. So I get to take these two programs, apply them to my personal needs as a homeowner, and get some rebates for the expenses that I incur to increase the energy efficiency of my home. It would be amazing if the province of New Brunswick had a similar kind of, we want to reduce expenditures on this by this much. We want to reduce carbon intensity in procurement by this much. We want to increase building efficiency as an aggregate for a community by this much. Whatever it is, it would be amazing if we could kind of file in and say, great, that's, there's fruit there, there's investment there. We can kind of gear our approach to climate action to take that synergy, right? And that's what it's about. It's about synergizing with the different levels of government, because here in St. John, Sabina, you talked about risk mitigation and risk management. We hold the highest risk profile for any community in this province, right? We have so much heavy industry here that it would take a budget of hundreds of millions of dollars just to properly mitigate with Canadian federal levels, just to properly mitigate those risks. I'll take one example, our marshalling yard on the east side, right? It has so many trains that would carry so many dangerous goods that our expertise around emergency measures would never be able to resource that properly, as far as evacuation, as far as mitigation, as far as response. I mean, they do their best, but it's often said that there's not one community in this country that properly mitigates their risk around fire, right? Around the different, it's not a code book like buildings have, but it's like this best practice for fire protection services, and no one fully does that, even as a city. And we're even further in that case. We have a liquid natural gas plant, we have an oil refinery, we have pulp and paper mills, we have a heavy industry port, we have a recycling center, a metal recycling center at AIM at our port that is literally constantly blowing up propane tanks. I can't explain to you how expensive it would be if we had to properly mitigate those emergencies. And we don't have that kind of support for just the simple public safety piece that we need as a city. We can't recover those costs from the province. We have to figure out a way to mitigate those risks as a city. And we've been doing it for 100 years, or for, at least 100 years, 200 plus years as, Canada's oldest city. And it is something that I've had to learn as a councillor in a shocking way, to find out, oh my gosh, we spend over almost 50% of our budget. Well, more like, a third of our budget on, a little over a third, on public safety. And how can that be when you look at other cities? Well, it's because of this crazy risk factor. So it's always important for us to be able to figure out, where can we get support from the province on? And for climate action, we just don't have it. We don't see from the province what they want to achieve. And so a perfect example of that is, Premier Higgs wanted to advocate to the federal government to allow Beldoon as a coal power plant in New Brunswick to continue burning coal to 2040, because we couldn't possibly afford it to get them off coal sooner. And that's through NB Power. Yet NB Power continues to be this venture capitalist type entity that doesn't mind blowing a bunch of money on crazy experimental science in Florida, doesn't mind. I mean, back to when I was a kid, when Bernard Lord was premier, they went down with NB Power to Venezuela to do a handshake deal with an ore emulsion producer, and it never amounted to anything, and it cost the province hundreds of millions of dollars. NB Power continues to be a major risk factor for this entire province, and as a municipality with an energy utility, we really felt that as we empowered this utility to go out and produce power so that we could become a more resilient community and develop those partnerships, that we would be rewarded, except we have been nothing but blocked. And so it's no secret that NB Power has been forced to build its own transmission lines from where our Birch Hill wind farm is going to be to the city, despite the fact that the province through NB Power has transmission lines passing right by it. So we were not allowed to use NB Power's transmission lines to transmit energy to our own city. So that was something we had to spend $9.5 million doing. Sorry, and St. John Energy had to spend $9.5 million doing and raising funds for. Then now that they're in a battle with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, and this is not settled. This is constantly something we're looking at and trying to figure out, what can we do? How do we get them to partner with us? So the Department of Transportation Infrastructure on Fairville Boulevard in our city doesn't have an easement for our transmission lines that we built from Birch Hill to get to Paradise Row, where our energy, where the north end kind of station is for transmission and distribution for energy. So it's like at every turn we have JDI saying we can't use their rail bridge to transmit power that is clean and renewable. We have John Irving at OSCO that has put up a fuss about using his land to put a pole on so we can get the darn line across Reversing Falls. And we have NB Power that just continually says, no, we don't really want to help you. And the reason is pretty simple, is NB Power has this major revenue requirement to generate $1 billion in revenue. And if St. John is buying less NB Power's energy, then it's a problem for their bottom line. And it's just, we don't have that provincial leadership. And it's not to damn everybody at the province, because this has been built, this behemoth and this problem has been built for the past 40 years. And I just wish we had a government that would start to say, we really want to solve this problem. And so here's some investments for municipalities to grab onto to solve this problem around climate change or action. And we just don't have it. So I use the St. John Energy example as that, and I tell that whole story just to give people an example of, there are ideas in municipalities. There are amazing opportunities in municipalities. And we have a model with St. John Energy that's been internationally recognized, nationally recognized, that has, its outcomes and its deliverables have been inspiring around some of this for New Brunswick, a small municipal utility, with international partnerships and everything like that. But we don't have a province that wants to replicate that in Fredericton, in Sackville, in other places where we know it's really a matter of replication. We've done the work, we've done the kind of best practicing and the modeling, and we have this expert here that we just can't replicate. And I think that continues to be the one that I'm most shocked by as a municipal councillor, to know that, there is all this potential, but we can't capitalize on it. Anyway, so my spicy rant, and that's just one. There's other ones too. I mean, we would love to be able to, increase our active transportation. We'd love to be able to get, as I put on my strategic planning hat, the cities right now is developing a 10-year strategic plan. And one of the goals that we have in there as an initiative is to increase people using sustainable transportation. That would be transit, that would be biking, that would be walking, that would be e-biking, things like that. Increase it to 20%. Right now we have about 11% of our population of commuters that use sustainable transportation modes. And so we want to get that to 20%. That's a concrete goal that we do have control over, that we are taking measures. We're modernizing our transit system right now. Even to Councillor Donovan's municipality, Quispamsis, we have a COMEX that we want to figure out how to expand and how to make more valuable to people who live in our region, and things like that. So anyway, there's a bunch of things that municipalities have the potential for. And it's always important to keep that conversation top of mind for people, because when it comes to election cycles, we don't often hear our provincial MLA candidates talking about them. And I really wish that they would pay attention more to some of these more grassroots and more local ideas that exist. So anyway, I don't know if anybody has any other comments before we get to a couple of questions, but if anybody had any other piece that they wanted to mention, if you forgot something, I want to give you a chance to do that now.
I wanted to mention one thing. I've found this interesting website called buildersforclimateaction.org, and you might want to check it out. They've got a paper on there on construction materials that you, Brent, in particular, might find interesting.
I'm Googling it right now. I'm going to share it in the box.
There's one comment that I wanted to make. Part of it, as part of our challenges has always been that there's not enough money going around for municipalities to do the work they want to do. And our town, Saco, actually put forward one of the motions that was approved at the last Union of Municipalities meeting just this past summer, which had to do with the Climate Action Fund that the province has. The Climate Action Fund is the fund that collects all the money from the carbon tax that we have in New Brunswick. And as you may be aware, a part of that money, of course, goes to this brainy idea of small nuclear reactor development. But aside from that, we actually put that motion in, and it did get approved. And I sent a copy over to the opposition, one of the opposition parties, to make sure they were aware that it's in UMNB's motions to allocate more funding from the Climate Action Fund to municipalities, so that they can implement some of the actions they need to do, whether it is on the risk reduction from flooding, planning, or implementation of mitigation measures. I mean, there's so much that municipalities can do. It's easy to draw up a quick list for any kind of municipality, small or large, and then say, okay, you give this municipality $10,000 and then you scale it up. And they all will come up with fantastic ideas and fantastic projects that are either will reduce the risk to them in the community from impacts from climate change, or improve or decrease the greenhouse gas emissions that they produce. So I think, Brent, you're right. I mean, there's no climate plan, really. There isn't. Sure, we've had one, but it was a list of things. But it's not a goal. It doesn't make strategic sense. Yet investing in municipalities would make strategic sense in this province, because there are very few municipalities that I've talked to that don't have an interest in climate change one way or another, either because they are already impacted, or because they've got people who really want action. So it is a need. It's just going to get louder, and provincial government that's tone deaf on this is not good. So, but on the other hand, I also think there is no need to sit on our hands, because there's still a lot that we can do without that leadership that we obviously don't have at the provincial level right now.
Yeah, it's a good point. Margot, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that. I see you nodding a little bit, but.
Nope, I'm good.
All right. So we're going to move into just some comments and questions that I've picked up on over the night. This is one I wanted to pick up on. So Juliana, who's a councillor from Ward 3 in Truro, is tuning in tonight. And I just think that's really cool. Highlight that we've got an audience that spans provinces. Like, wow. Thank you for tuning in, Juliana. And I've heard from some different interesting things happening around your municipality. So who knows? Maybe we'll have a little interprovincial dialogue the next time. This is one I think might be interesting. There's a comment from Steph Doucette. I think she just left it a word there. What is more important on the climate change piece? Gas or propane powered vehicles. So I wanted to put that to the group. I know that the city of St. John recently purchased, and this is where I bury my head and I go, oh no. But like 8 years ago, they purchased low sulfur diesel new buses. And I look at that now, and now we're looking at modernizing our transit system, which could include, transit on demand. It could include smaller buses that don't do the main arterial routes as often. It could include all kinds of combinations to reduce the carbon footprint of transit and make it more efficient. But that's just one thing. I know there's propane buses, there's electric buses. Noah, you mentioned an electric Zamboni. Has there been any discussion around anybody's council around procurement that brought some of this into consideration? Go ahead, Noah, I see you up there.
So actually, I did forget to mention it, so I'm glad that it's actually coming back up. The town of Quispamsis, our fleet of vehicles is all electric. So, our maybe not the entire fleet, but a lot of our fleet is electric. The vehicles that, the building inspectors go to houses with, they're all electric. We've got electric charging stations directly at the town hall. And I think it's working out really good. I think it's a small change. I think all these are small changes, that sometimes they get a little blown out of proportion, because I've heard people say, if we switch to electric, it's not going to be as good as gas, or, it's going to cost us so much more. But in the long run, if you have to, put out a tenure to buy a car, or to, change the light bulbs or whatever you're doing, you're going to do it anyway. So you might as well spend a little bit of extra money, or maybe in some cases save a little bit of extra money and just buy, what might be better for the environment. I mean, like I said, there haven't been any issues at all with our fleets that I know of. And I feel like not only is it good for the environment, but it actually makes me personally feel good about, knowing that our fleet of vehicles that are going out there to residents' homes, or, going out to building lots, they're all electric. So it's helping the environment a little bit. And it's the way we're doing it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I forgot one thing, which is it's sort of a curious conversation we had in budget deliberations. So the Mayor's Roundtable this year again had the opportunity to review our budget proposals, and included in those were some procurements like a new bylaw vehicle. I think the Zamboni was on there. There was also a fire truck, a new fire truck. And so we had this conversation. The Mayor's Roundtable actually did some research, and they actually found a supplier of an electric Zamboni. And I know the town's considering that. It's not going to go in next year, and who knows with municipal reform what happens, but it is on the table. And the bylaw vehicle is on the table as being electric. So those conversations have been happening. But also what's really interesting, there's a back and forth. For example, fire truck is a different kind of vehicle. There are no electric fire trucks right now. It's a question of risk. It's a question of safety. So you have to do something. And so one of the ideas was, well, in your procurement process, then delay it by a year or two. These developments are really fast. But then, that counterbalance of yes, but, in our asset management plan or asset replacement plan, we have a certain number of years that we use that really high the emergency vehicles like fire trucks, and then they get replaced, even though they're still functional. But just to keep that high level of functionality in our emergency equipment, and we've got some fantastic emergency equipment, and really well maintained. So, and then the discussion of yes, but we can't delay. So in some cases, we're sort of bound by some of those these big purchases, which for Sackville are massive, right? Sort of a new fire truck for us. I mean, we've got a $12 million budget. It's like tiny compared to yours. And, so we can't delay, but we know that it'll come. But at least these conversations are happening. It's no longer like, oh, electric. No, actually, somebody's doing the research, and somebody's looking at, is it possible yet? And if it's possible, what's the price tag? Well, on one of the vehicles, I forget what it was, not the Zamboni, there was another one. The price tag was like $600,000 more than a gas-powered or diesel-powered vehicle. And it goes like, whoa, that's on a $12 million budget where we already have to borrow for any major equipment purchases. That's considerable. And it means that some other things we can't do, which we need to do. So what I really like about this, that in our case, through the Mayor's Roundtable, this conversation was put on the table. And then these draft conversations, actually happen. How do we actually do this? Certain things we can't do yet, we're aware. And I really appreciate that. I also appreciate the problems that municipalities will have in some cases. Like, if you have recently purchased a set of buses, well, they're not going to be replaced very soon. And then you just got to work within that framework. I'm fine with that. But as long as we have the conversations at the municipal level and we can do that, that's fair enough. And these conversations need to be out in public, because they're interesting conversations, and folks that have elected us need to know, yep, no, we can't go electric with our fire truck. Oh, no, not yet. 5-10 years down the road, maybe the next replacement, there will be an opportunity to look at it, because it's not just, it's not a manufacturer that's somewhere else in the world, and it's not just one version that's out there and which will take years to build anyway. So just sort of some ideas around that.
And to your point, not every electric vehicle has a lower embodied carbon footprint than a gas one, and that's the hard thing. I'm a tool library guy here in St. John, right? And I always use this example for the tool library. I said, look, one cordless drill, the lithium in that battery was either mined in Chile or the Congo. It was sent to probably France to be refined. It was sent to China to be assembled into a package to be applied to a tool. all of that has rare earth minerals in it besides the lithium for the battery. Then it's put on a boat, it's driven, it's piloted across the Pacific Ocean, then put on a train or a truck, driven across the country to get to Home Depot here in St. John, right? This story, I've tracked that, and we don't measure it. We don't know, like I can buy that battery for $100, but the downstream effects of the carbon allocation and embodiment of that tool or that vehicle or that thing doesn't necessarily make sense if we're buying and purchasing and extracting that more locally. And so that's always a nuanced argument to have around electric can be better, it can be very important, until we start to look at the F-150 Lightning, which is like, those batteries are insane on that truck. And yeah, it's electric, but we're not at the point where we have the local refining and manufacturing of that to make sense over the gas powered one. I mean, it's a bit of a more conversation we have time for now, but that's, I think, something that we as councillors have an opportunity to do with the public. To your point, Savina, on things like electric vehicles, to say it just doesn't make sense for these reasons. Anybody else?
I just want to throw one thing, because it came to me now what the vehicle is, and you'll all know what it is. It's a street sweeper. So one of those machines that pushes the stuff out of the road, so it's safer on the roads. Anyway, and it was a learning exercise for me as well, because is there street sweepers that are electric? There are actually some. I think they're $600,000, whatever. It doesn't matter, quite more expensive. And then the CAO was saying, I think it was the CAO who said, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, right? And just using that climate lens. And he was saying, but this street sweeper and I was talking about delaying and saying, well, let's just wait until it gets cheaper, or we can afford it. And he was saying, this street sweeper is really, really ancient. And when it runs, it puts out this gray smoke, right? And so he already was thinking, yes, but maybe it's better to replace it right away to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions right away, and ignore the electric option for now, but it will already have an impact just replacing it. Anyway, so I think, to be fair, this electric, and we have solar panels at home, and the business that I was working on until recently has an electric vehicle, so I'm one of those people. But that is also, we have to be really cautious as municipalities to not overdo it, but to really ourselves as advocates for climate action to be able to think things through from the operational side, or from just balancing where we're going, right? Not like Noah, what you were saying, it's all about this. It's great. Yeah. But there are sort of these needs to balance out what we actually do and what we advocate for and where we spend our money on.
Yep. That's really good. Okay. We're going to move to the next question. Unless Margot, if you wanted to chime in. Nope. No. Okay. So Shelley Petit, who is chair of the Coalition for People with Disabilities, I'm hoping I'm getting that title right for the organization. She's here in St. John, and she commented this. I'll just bring it up. As per the risk management conversation we're having, it would be nice to see municipalities in New Brunswick start to remove barriers for persons with disabilities. Since we are the single largest demographic in New Brunswick, and I think Shelley's referenced to me multiple times that about 24% of New Brunswickers suffer from some sort of seen or unseen disability. And we need to be included as true stakeholders. And I think that is an absolutely valid point. Something we've seen here in St. John, we just saw a rerouted bus terminal around one of our malls be in a completely inaccessible location. And so how do we as a city try to increase our sustainable transit users when we don't have locations for drop off that are accessible? We can't. And so, the city dropped the ball on some things around the approval of that. The designer dropped the ball on, even from a professional standards perspective, to say, as an engineer, to say, hey, I'm flagging this doesn't meet some of these minimum requirements for accessibility. You've got to cross 7 lanes of parking lot throughway for a person to get to your mall entrance. That's a problem. So there was multiple people that dropped the ball. The point is that it's inaccessible. And I find that, there's a number of conversations right now, and I think around the climate action one is one of them that suffers from this. So it might be worth chiming in on for other people. that it's either one or the other. Oh, we're either going to fight climate action, or we're going to fight racism, or we're going to fight, disability and accessibility, issues, or we're going to fight. And really, that all 3 and 4 can converge, because in a major way, when we're talking about climate action, we're talking about redesigning. We're talking about building communities and cities differently. We're talking about redesigning infrastructure and trying to reimagine how our communities function.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, when you start to reimagine and redesign, is when you can implement a lot of different things in an efficient way, in a synergetic way. That's not like, oh, well, we'll wait till 2050 to start solving that problem. It's like, no, now's the time. You're peeling back the road, you're redesigning the road, you're peeling back the pipes, you're redesigning the building. Let's build in this other stuff that we now know as a society is important. Anyway, that's my piece. I'll let someone else take that if they want to. No takers on risk management?
Yeah, I am taking that one, because you mentioning, peeling back roads and active transportation, and that goes for, making areas accessible. Now, we don't have public transportation, of course, in Sackville, but we do have sidewalks. We do have limited or no bike lanes, things like that. So, one of the things, and I totally agree with you, these things just overlap so well. If we redesign, let's say, for active transportation, which is more the case in not for public transport, but for active transportation, then we redesign it the same way for accessibility. And maybe it's just a story that sort of really hit me weirdly. So we have a Saco Community Concerns Facebook group here. About 1,000, maybe 1,500 people are members of that. And there's for 2 or 3 months, there's this one person who continued to post on there about accessible housing, because she has challenges with accessible housing. And for months, she could not even rent a place in Sackville that was accessible. And I was thinking, what the heck is going on? And so my thinking then is, okay, so we dropped the ball somewhere. I know now we're getting inclusionary zoning, which include affordable housing conditions on apartments, etc., which is good. But at that time, maybe we should include also accessible housing conditions. Put accessible housing conditions on any new buildings that come up, because that was rather unbelievable for me that in Sackville, this person had just absolutely a hard time. I'm not even sure if she's found yet a place to rent that is accessible. So the ripping up the roads and redesigning and thinking in multiple ways. You can think climate change that way by not paving it all over again, using bioswales, these kind of things. You can think bike lanes. You can think better descents from sidewalks. All that can be integrated, and it can all be linked, just like you said. So I really like this idea of think about not just the piece of work that we're doing at that time, putting a new pipe under the street, X, Y, Z, but actually thinking about the street as being accessible, being climate resilient, I would say, and providing for these active transportation opportunities and accessibility issues. And I should say that, we're looking at it from an age-friendly community as well, which is really important.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the whole climate debate has really, I think, brought out the realization that these problems are all intersecting, and they all have to be dealt with as we address this huge existential threat to our existence and the existence of other things on the planet. That we have to the solutions to those that threat cannot recreate the problems that have gotten us here in the first place, and it has to bring everybody along, regardless of economic status or race or ability. We just can't leave people behind. And that's the kind of language that I find very heartening, that's embodied in things like the Green New Deal. And those ideas are fantastic, and I just hope we don't lose sight of them as things start to break down. The weather events become more severe. I like Sabina, I believe, am concerned that we will stop. We'll start throwing money at so-called solutions that are really problems in disguise for the future. So.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to your point, right? We just did it with the Lancaster Mall here in the city. And I mean, I did talk to the developer this weekend at Strathallan, and I say, how do we miss this? And it was just like, ultimately it boiled down to the lack of public engagement.
What was the issue?
It's that the transit drop-off locations for this the Lancaster Mall were so far away from the mall and so unprotected and mitigated that for somebody with a disability, it's a living nightmare to try to get across this area. And it happens to be basically the main mall on the west side that caters to lower income and seniors for a number of reasons. So it's like, we usually miss this stuff because of the lack of public engagement, because we don't give, our local experts the opportunity to weigh in. We make these decisions in isolation. But yeah, Noah, did you have anything to add to that?
No, actually, I didn't. Anything I would have said has already been said. So I certainly appreciate hearing all the discussion. I'm just kind of sitting back and taking it all in.
Yeah, no, it's great. We're coming up to 2 hours here, so that is our hard stop. Definitely a hard stop for 2 hours.
Did we want to wrap up real quickly as with what we're going to do moving forward, or like our hopes maybe, or let's start that if you wanted.
Let's do a shot. Let's do a shot at that. And Noah, why don't we start with you? If you want to hit us off with maybe a couple, like just a minute and a half of like. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to start. I know it wasn't a City of Fredericton. It wasn't a City of Fredericton sponsored thing, but a while back I was actually looking at a news article that was talking about small houses. I guess a developer in Fredericton is building a small housing subdivision or something of that nature. And affordable housing has always been a real touchy thing in Quispamsis, because unfortunately we don't really have apartments, and the apartments that we do have or are going up are, upwards of, $16,000, $17,000, $2,000. And I mean, you don't have to have a degree from Harvard to understand that is not anywhere near affordable, especially in our communities. But again, I feel like with those smaller homes, and I don't say tiny homes because I feel like that stresses a lot of people out. They think, how can I live in this tiny space? But those are small houses. Like, I looked at them and they're quite like they're a normal size of an apartment. And I feel like, with a lot of cities, maybe not our own, maybe not my municipality or, anybody else's, but a lot of cities are running out of space, and, they don't have, there's no room for these big houses. And to be totally honest, I mean, my opinion, again, nobody needs a 4-story mansion to live in. You just need, a place that you can, gather, a place that you can lay your head, and a place that you can cook. And I mean, I'm perfectly fine with that. That would be comfortable for me. But again, going back to these small little houses, they don't take as much building materials to do them. There's not as much, electricity used in them, or water, and it just boils down. It all kind of comes into a pot of, how can we get our developers to start coming to our communities and thinking, environmentally of, could we build the houses a little bit smaller? Will people buy them? And, if they do buy them, then it gives us a sort of like a blueprint of how to move forward with our affordable housing, or even just housing in general. Bigger is not always better, and I truly believe that when it does come to housing. So I don't really have anything moving forward. I truly, and I mean, I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything, but I really do believe that Quispamsis, among all of our other communities, are trying, very hard. Maybe not all of us are trying as hard as others, but I do believe that any little effort that is gone into climate change is a win in my book, because, again, you look back before 2005, it was a joke and nobody took it seriously. And now people are starting to open up their eyes. And I think that is a win to me.
Yeah. And so is that something you think you're going to continue to push for in your role as a councillor, Noah? Just that tie-in between affordable housing, green housing, sustainability? Is that the...
Yeah, well, again, like I said, I there's no affordable housing out here, and I'm thinking, how can we hit two birds with one stone? And I feel
Yeah.
like that's the way to do it because, again, I mean, it wasn't something that the city of Fredericton did, so we'd have to find, a developer willing to do things like that. But I really do think it would be well received, especially in this area, because I mean, we do have a lot of young people, and there are a lot of seniors. Tying back to the accessibility part, no senior needs a big house. They just need somewhere small, somewhere that is accessible to them. And I really do think these small houses would again be accessible, affordable, and environmentally friendly. And I mean, if we can hit all those points, then I think that we're doing pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. Great synergy. Margot, over to you. What's the next topic for you guys to hit, or for you to hit as a councillor?
Well, interesting you should raise the tiny home village, which is being financed in part by a local entrepreneur here. And I was speaking with him a couple of weeks ago, and he had just ordered 270 solar panels. So he is aiming to make that development as close to net zero as he can. And it, to me, pairing, I can't remember how many units. See, Scott, I think maybe, anyway, I can't remember, but he's pairing the development of these tiny homes with a development of a center that is going to serve as a hub for employment training, bringing services to people who need them. And they're going to have, a retail space and a construction training workshops. And so it's a very forward-thinking development. I'm really pleased to see it coming forward. And, there's a lot of doom and gloom around these days, and people can be very, depressed about the state of the world and climate change and so on. But I think we really have to start, thinking about regeneration of everything. Everything that we do has to leave the world in a better place, and with more biodiversity and more, more life in a given development. So I kind of, think that we need to really start envisaging and having concrete examples of what the future could look like. And I think this tiny house thing is a possibility, and retrofitting houses and thinking climate with everything we do. When we look at a budget item, we say, well, what are the emissions from that going to be? So anyway, climate change is here now. We just going to have to get through it and bring everyone along with us as we go through it. And in that respect, every affordable housing or tiny home village is a climate action. It's all tied in. So
It's great. No, it's great. All right, Sabina, go ahead.
Yeah. So, the municipal reform is a terrible distraction and disruption, and it's going to be for a while. So, but my commitment is to continue at town council to look at exactly what Margaret just said, at all the work that we do with the climate lens. And, I have this plan, and this is not really a plan, but it's sort of just every council meeting that I attend, even if I just point out, oh, hello, there's a link here to climate change, and there's links to that, and if we do that, it's better or something. If I do it only once at a council meeting, then it's good. But in general, my plan is to continue knocking on that door and helping the climate change coordinator move forward, and developing a climate lens for our community that makes sense for a community of 5,000 people, right, with a staff of 37, including the janitors and cleaners. So that's my plan. And despite that distraction and disruption, I think we cannot afford to be distracted and disrupted. And that's why I am so angry with this government to throw this on us when we've got more important things to do in dealing with climate change and doing everything we can. So yeah.
Great. All right, so the last word, I guess, goes to me on this. a little bit of a different perspective, from here in St. John. We were desperate for municipal reform and have been for 60 years since the last municipal reforms under Robichaud were championed and fixed rural New Brunswick, but along the way broke urban St. John for a number of reasons. So it is like we still don't have anything in this white paper that's helpful, especially on the climate action file. So I can't argue with you there that we do have a lot of important work that isn't going to be answered by this massive amount of staff, resources, councillor energy, you name it, different elections. But anyway, here we are. But I think for me, there's an interesting tie-in there. I've always been a bit of a champion for rehabbing buildings instead of tearing them down. That's how I got into council. I tried with a group of 40 people in the city to save a heritage building from being demolished, and the damn thing caught fire before we could rehab it. But it was an excellent opportunity. It was like a stab in the heart moment for me 2 years ago in 2019 when that happened. And that really set me on a path to say, how in the heck did we let this happen? The embodied energy in this building, the capacity of this building to house people, the amount of community that rallied around this building was staggering. The only thing we didn't have was money. We didn't have people. We didn't know people with money, and we didn't have money. And so we were trying to raise money to rehab it. And we had all the right business case. We had the right climate case. We had the right everything, but we couldn't pull it off. And so to me, it's about finding those gaps in policy and legislation where we are just missing opportunities for synergy and to capitalize, to Noah's point, and everybody's here really, on what's happening organically, and to let that inertia really go and do what it's supposed to. Because sometimes we as councillors and municipalities can get in the way and stifle that. And that is certainly something that I want to try to be different on. But it has been, it's been a great, oh my goodness, like 2 hours here. We've been at this 2 hours, 1 minute. Time flies. Again, back to the, I see Juliana message back from Ward 3 in Truro. She's really enjoyed living or listening to this and being a part of this conversation at the municipal level. It was great to have her. We had about 42 people cumulatively on this broadcast. It's going to be saved on YouTube. So we'll share that link, and hopefully, again, it's just something that we can use as a tool to say, oh, you're interested in climate action? Well, in New Brunswick, well, hey, start here. Here's an interesting little discussion that took place on 4 councillors. We are going to be trying to get a little climate hub off the ground here in our region, but there's lots going on in every municipality, as people saw. So engage, leave your mark, get connected, the whole piece.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brent, for initiating this. Great idea.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and we'll be in touch.
Bye.
Take care.